So how do you get people from like just hearing about your podcast to actually being like subscribers and then evangelists for your podcast? And one of those steps is to get them to follow your podcast. How do you get them from the first time they press play to our research shows that if somebody plays 3 episodes, they're going to listen to like 90% of future episodes.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Nootka Sound Podcast. I'm your host, Nemanja. Today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Dave Keine. Dave is the head of product and marketing at Podchaser, which is the biggest podcasting database in the world. Hey Dave, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm having a good day. How about you?
Well, it's kind of hot out here, but it's going great.
Yeah, getting into those dog days of summer.
Okay, in case somebody doesn't know what Podchaser is, you can think of it as Discogs in the UK or All Music in the US and what it represents for the music industry, or IMDB for the film industry. So that's basically Podchaser for the podcasting industry. Dave, can you tell us more about Podchaser and how it got started?
Absolutely. So Podchaser got started in about 2016, 2017, and the reason it was started was actually because our founder, Bradley Davis, was commuting a lot and he was listening to podcasts, and specifically he was listening to the Tim Ferriss show, which I don't know if anybody's ever listened to it, but it's usually like 2-hour-long episodes and with experts out there. And he basically had this problem of he didn't know if he was going to hit the play button, if it was going to be a good episode. And with ratings and reviews, you had them on Apple Podcasts and they were kind of just on the series level, and they kind of had the same problem as Amazon to where you just had 5-star reviews everywhere. So he envisioned basically a service where you could rate and review actually individual episodes. And that's how Podchaser started. It started as a kind of an up and down vote arrow of, is this episode good or not? And then had some trending charts from there. Since then, it's grown into this more idealized version of kind of like what you mentioned with IMDB, to where people can come on, they can leave ratings and reviews, but they can also do things like create their own playlists that they can share with others. We also have credits, so you can see who the host of a podcast is, who the guest is, but also all of like the back credits, like who sound engineered this, who was the producer, the editor. And so it's kind of become a discovery tool, but also in a way a resume tool for the people who are working in podcasting. All of that is to say that really at our core, what our mission is to help power discovery. So there's a bunch of different ways that people discover podcasts. It can be through, simply seeing what's popular. It can be through word of mouth, and it can be through kind of like what their friends are saying. So we're kind of putting all of that together into a nice discovery platform that everybody can come on and kind of find their next favorite podcast. On the other side of that, people often ask us, how does Podchaser make money? And the kind of goal of Podchaser is to kind of use all of this information and database that we've gathered around podcasting. What is a podcast about? What are the tags? Who's in it? And use that to power kind of professional services. So we have a service called Podchaser Pro, which allows PR agencies, marketing agencies to come on and kind of see, what is the reach of a podcast? What are its demographics? How do I get in contact with them? And then we also have services where we do like guest placement. And I think in the future, we're a VC-backed company. We're not, specifically going into revenue super hard right now. But in the future, I think you'll see us roll out things like maybe a jobs marketplace or extra analytics features for podcasters. So it's not necessarily like an advertising revenue model, but it's more so, just creating useful tools for podcasters and brands out there.
That sounds very interesting. And the one thing that really got me interested is that you said you're going to work on the job market. Will it be like the gig economy, like the same kind you see on Fiverr or Upwork, or is it something different?
Yeah, so this is kind of like a bit of a ways down our roadmap, but I think it stems from the idea that because we have credits and anybody can come on and add credits and it all goes through a moderation process for approval and accuracy, what that ends up being is you kind of have your own resume for everything you've done in podcasting. And that can go for people who are behind the scenes, but it can also go for guests. Like you can go on to my Podchaser and you can see what I've produced. You can see every episode I've been a guest on, and you can click play right there.
Yeah.
So it is, in a sense, it kind of has become a little bit like of a LinkedIn for podcasting specifically. So if you just kind of follow that credit, and again, this is probably a bit of the ways down the road, people already are using Podchaser pages to apply for gigs or to get freelance opportunities out there, as well as to apply for actually like full-time employment at studios. We've seen it with people sharing like, hey, this is everything I've done. Just one space. Here's a link.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take too much of a leap to think that in the future, Podchaser could have a connection source for booking the people who could be a guest, but they could also be somebody who can come on and make your show for you. So again, it's kind of a bit of a ways out there, but that's the kind of tools that we look at when we look at, how is Podchaser going to make money? It's probably something like that. And that might be even a free service.
Yeah.
Who knows? But yeah, like stuff like that where we can just benefit people is really what we're after versus a throw up a banner ad and walk away kind of situation.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, before we get into the technical stuff, can you tell me how you ended up in podcasting? I mean, being a marketer in this industry isn't something that I see a lot of people actually going for.
Yeah, I used to work in advertising, worked at an agency, and we worked with some pretty high profile brands, but I was on the digital side, and the kind of bread and butter of the company was radio, right? And this is back in like the early 2010s. So podcasting was around, but podcasting wasn't podcasting yet. For a long time while I was commuting there, though, I was listening to podcasting, and I kind of just didn't make that connection of like, hey, radio is basically podcasting and radio is going to die one day. So around 2014, I actually had left that place. And I think it was around the time of the Startup Podcast with Gimlet Media, where he talks about creating a podcast company, where I was like, okay, there's actually a business here, right? I think a lot of people felt that way when that came out. And I was working at a different agency, and I just kind of took it as an opportunity to go and talk to everybody in the industry. I used my clout as being an agency person to get pricing on what it costs to do ads on podcasts. I just listened to the credits of podcasts and would email people and be like, hey, you're a producer. I'd love to get involved. Can I borrow like an hour of your time?
Yeah.
And then just read everything I possibly could, right? Eventually that folded into, I ended up going back to the other agency and leading their kind of push into doing podcast ad sales. That was kind of the first natural thing that evolved into, okay, we're doing ad sales. What if we actually make content? What if we make branded content? And so we spun up a sister studio there and started creating podcasts. After about a year and a half or so, I struck out on my own and created my own podcast studio. And we created only a couple shows, but we had about 2 million downloads in our first year. It was pretty successful. But I had been talking to the guys at Podchaser. I'd actually been using Podchaser to help grow my own shows.
Yeah.
And had been talking to them for a long time, and they had an opportunity to hire a head of marketing, right? There's not many opportunities where you get to work at a really exciting up and coming startup.
Yeah.
So it took a lot of soul searching, but 2.5 years later, it's a pretty good decision that I made there. And worked in marketing there. We oversaw a huge growth of the platform. And when you're working in the startup space, especially in the software space, you kind of start to marry marketing with the actual product, like what's on the website, what features are you developing? So around March of 2020, they came to me and were like, hey, you've been doing a good job on marketing. You're also going to do product now. And so now on top of marketing, I also oversee like our roadmap of what we're going to develop, new products that are coming out, all of that stuff. And it's been a blast. We've grown like crazy. Just since January, we've gone from like 8 full-time employees. Now we're well over 30. Exciting times. I think Podchaser is really poised to do some really cool stuff in podcasting. So one of the best decisions I ever made was to come over here, and it's been great to just be a part of the next evolution of podcasting for sure.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I'm really glad you feel that way. Like, especially, I know people are kind of hesitant to start working for startups because there's not much guaranteed, but I'm so glad you feel as if you found something that really, truly makes you happy. And
luckily, I went from my own startup to their startup. So it was nice to go from kind of working with a handful of people who were working on projects to working with the team and kind of everybody pulling on the same side of that rope, which is nice.
Okay, Podchaser is a community-based platform, meaning people get to submit info about their shows. So do you guys do a lot of content management, or do you let the community just do their own thing?
Yeah, it's actually kind of a two-sided thing, and there's two pieces of this. So one is, we're a database. We want to have the data that powers discovery. And then the other part of it is, how do we actually use that data to get in front of people, right? Yeah. So on the first bit with how do we get our data, I would say it's pretty evenly split. We're a crowdsourcing platform, so anybody can come on and add credits, add tags. If you're a podcaster, you can add your podcast to custom categories that aren't on other platforms. And all of that stuff goes through moderation. And that's really like the big, powerful driver of Podchaser is we've kind of created almost a Wikipedia style service to where the people who use us are the ones who are able to make Podchaser really great. Mm-hmm. On the other side of that is, okay, we have all this data, throw in their ratings and reviews. How do we get this to people? And for that, we do take a really democratic approach. Mm-hmm. We have fashioned our ratings and reviews kind of in the opposite light of an Apple podcast, to where they don't affect charts over there. They do on Podchaser. We also have what's called an activity feed. So if you leave a rating review, it gets shown to other people, including your followers, but also on our popular feed. And then we do things like make it shareable, all of that. So at its core, what we try to do is to be a democratic platform. People come on, they leave a rating and review. We treat that the same as if they left a rating and review on another podcast that maybe isn't popular. So a lot of people in the indie space like us for that, because we're not picking teams. We're not meeting with big networks on the side to be like, hey, how do we get you like the big Jumbotron on the homepage? So I don't know if that helps explain it or not, but we do try to let the community drive what they think is important, because at the end of the day, we're just a few guys on a remote team. We don't know what's the best podcast out there. There's kind of wisdom in the crowd for sure.
Yeah, well, you said it. And if I may add, using Podchaser is free, and it's very easy to create an account and get started. So if you're hosting a show or doing some production or editing work, I highly recommend checking out Podchaser.
Yeah.
The biggest news we've had recently is that Apple rolled out their subscription program for podcast creators. Why do you think this is such a big deal, and what effect do you think this will have on the industry as a whole?
It's a good question. I think the subscription service, specifically with Apple, is solving a couple key things, right? So monetization has always been one of the two big problems in podcasting. One is growth. Some people call it discovery, but growth and monetization. So the ability to be able to monetize your podcast if maybe it doesn't have millions of views, or if you don't want to go hat in hand to an advertiser, it just creates another revenue source for us, right? Yeah. The other problem I think it's trying to solve is a bit of that growth thing. One of the reasons why networks have been so successful is they kind of act like a carousel, and somebody can they can start listening to one podcast and they use their on-air ad inventory to send it to other podcasts in the network. And so you kind of get this flywheel of people coming and trying out a podcast, and maybe they try 5 other podcasts and then you've got them hooked, right? So by doing their subscription feature, and a big part of that is their channels feature, which is where they kind of group multiple podcasts together. I think they're just trying to kind of narrow down that discovery mechanism to where if you get one person, maybe they stick around for multiple. The cynic in me says it's just one more thing that gets people to try to prefer one platform over another, and there is a gigantic war going on. It may be a cold war, it may be a hot war, but the next kind of 5 to 8 years of podcasting will be a giant tug of war between places like Apple and Spotify and Google and Amazon to see, who can win the podcast platform wars. So when you have a bunch of networks that are monetarily incentivized to use your platform and listeners who are using it because it is a way to listen without ads or because they're actually subscribed to it, that all just creates stickiness that's going to help drive people. And I'm sure there's going to be other platforms that do it as well. And we're just going to get this giant tug of war, and maybe somebody will win or we'll end up with a stalemate. I don't know.
Yeah, that's very well said. Obviously, with YouTube being one of the most popular platforms out there, we have a significant rise in video podcasts. Do you think this trend will continue to grow? And do you think this format will overtake the audio-only format, or will podcasts remain in the audio-only domain?
That's a good question, too. I think, first off, it should continue to grow, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Podcasting, at the end of the day, is content and distribution, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's you create something and it gets out to people. So we've already been proven people listen to podcasts on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
They watch them, but they also listen to them like in the background, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a podcaster and you're not putting at least your audio on YouTube, you're missing out because you're not meeting the listener where they are, right?
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to the actual video part of it, I have firsthand experience with this, and I think it makes sense for some people, especially for like larger shows, like a Joe Rogan or a Your Mom's Basement, where they can have a studio with cameras and they actually have people who are recording all of that. I did it, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it kind of like multiplied the production process and timeline by like 10.
Yeah, of course.
Because you can cover up so much in audio, right? It's a lot harder to cover it up in video. You kind of need multiple shots or zooms or however you want to do that. It also, to do it well, takes a lot of effort, right? I think one of the things that you can easily do is feel like you need to rush into video because Joe Rogan does it or somebody else does it. And it can actually decrease the quality of your show in weird ways, especially if you're a remote podcast, because it breaks the illusion of audio, which is in audio, if your mic sounds good, like that's kind of it. Like if you have good editing, your mic sounds good.
Yeah.
The brain automatically fills in that this is good podcast. This is professional. Like they could be sitting right next to each other, all that. If all of a sudden you throw up, just like a screen recording of a Skype call and it's pixelated and it's it just breaks that illusion. So I don't know where I got with that, but I think my conclusion is that if you have a podcast, take 10 seconds to just like create a video file of your audio and put it onto YouTube. That's going to just, again, help you get discovered in different places. There's really no downside to it as long as you're counting your analytics in a spreadsheet or something. But when it comes to the video, I think it makes sense if you have like a really like high quality production. If you're in the same place, it makes a lot of sense. But it can also like, don't underestimate the time suck and the production suck that it's going to cost. It can kill you for sure, especially if you're a small independent team.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like me being a sound engineer, I prefer the audio only podcasts. And then I see a lot of podcasts actually do that mistake of, thinking and going big, like with creating a big, like a YouTube production. And in the end, it's just a big waste of time and resources because it takes a lot to get it right,
Yeah, it does. One of the things that's interesting about YouTube that I think works better than anything else. So there are a couple companies out there that are trying to do podcast clips.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen it really take off yet, but it could. It's still kind of in its infancy.
Yeah.
YouTube does great with clips. If you have like a 5 to 10 minute section of your podcast that, works really well, you can tap into the YouTube algorithm and you can kind of, ride that out. I think that's one of the reasons why like a Joe Rogan became so big. Now you don't necessarily need video for that. You can just, put it up there as the audio only, maybe put in a couple pictures or something. But if you are doing YouTube, I would say, like I did this for a year and a half and thumbnails are everything. and consistency is everything.
Yeah.
If you put something out on a reliable timeline, if you have a cool thumbnail that people are going to click, that's what the algorithm really likes. And so, like, if you take a hiatus, it can screw you over. Like, you can go from being like, hey, we get 100,000 per episode to all of a sudden it's only getting shown to like 5,000 people or 500 people even. So like consistency is really a key that they reward.
Yeah, that's true. And even for platforms outside of YouTube, like for any other platform, basically, like consistency is key. The more episodes you put out, the more reach the episodes will have.
I agree. You mentioned something that I'd be interested to hear what you think as an audio like Zen master.
Sure.
You mentioned that audio only kind of really helps you to make super high quality productions, things like editing and, story structure, all that stuff. Like, can you talk a little bit about that, of just like how you see audio as like, I guess, not to put words into your mouth, but kind of like a forgivable medium?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. But like the way I see it is like people aren't used to listening, especially like today in our society, people tend to like talk more than they actually listen. And to me, what kind of creates the magic is being in the moment and actually taking a moment to actually listen to what's going on. Because when you get that visual format, then you kind of lose out on that listening part, because you're not focusing on the listening anymore. You're focusing on what your eyes are seeing. And that's kind of a big minus for me. And the essence is basically when you start creating video as well, you kind of lose out on audio because you're not focusing on the audio anymore. And that's like, to me, that's why I got into podcasting, because audio is really important to me and I like listening to things and I like listening to people speak, and I think it gives me a different perspective on something if I focus on something that they're saying instead of focusing on what they look like or what is the brand image or identity or something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like the old trope of, and maybe it's true, I don't know, of blind people having their other senses heightened.
Yeah.
Maybe that's offensive in 2021. I apologize if it is.
I'm not sure.
But when you're consumed with video and listening to the long form content, you don't pay attention to it as much.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be said for when it's audio only and you're listening to somebody's voice, you can really hear the emotion. You can really hear what they're going after. And you can hear kind of like these little tiny breaks of confidence and the formulation of thought, kind of like what you probably just heard there. But all that stuff that you may miss when maybe you're looking at somebody's face. Not to say that video doesn't give, good context, and body language is a huge thing, but audio only does allow you to kind of untap this like often hidden part of human communication, which I think is what makes it so powerful for people, is it's super intimate.
Yeah, so true. That's what I wanted to say, is that it's really intimate. And like that's something that's a big difference in regards to like the mainstream media, where the media isn't really intimate. And like in podcasting, it's really intimate. You get to hear people breathing and you get, I don't know, I just can't describe it, but it's like, to me, the audio only podcast is really special in my mind.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. We're seeing more and more celebrities starting their own podcasts. Why do you think they feel the need to start podcasting? Is it perhaps to express something that isn't possible in the mainstream media, or is it just because everybody's doing it at this point?
Yeah, both, I guess. A couple things. I think as podcasting has grown, the realization among people who are business focused is that to create an actual like well-rounded campaign or focus on the market, you need to be in video, text, audio, and maybe throw in there just like visuals, banners and stuff. So it becomes a part of the tool set to just get a message out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these celebrities are driven by publicists who are basically their personal advertising agency. So it makes sense that they're bringing it in there. That said, I think podcasting allows for something that celebrities have wanted for a long, long time. And that's a little bit to be understood.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the people who are on tabloids. These are the people who everybody knows and people write about them. But like they don't actually know the person. So the long form podcast where they get to hang out, they get to express like these nuanced views or provide perspective on their worldview or to have people on. I think that's really attractive to not only celebrities, but to everybody, because everybody wants to get, their word out there, right?
Yeah.
And podcasts allow you to do that in a way that actually is like, in a world full of clickbait and sound bites, it actually is like a reasonable human to human connection. I will say that we saw on our side, since we do credits at Podchaser, last year during the pandemic, like at the peak of it, we saw so many celebrities getting into podcasting. And I think a very strong driver was the fact that podcasting is pandemic proof in a sense. It's socially distancing compliant. Like you and I are in different countries right now. It's different times of day. Like I never have to see you. I don't have to wear a mask. I'm in my living room right here. The same thing occurs for celebrities. And when they couldn't go out there and make TV shows or do stand-up comedy or anything, this was a way for them to do that. And then the listener themselves also can listen in their house. They can listen on a walk.
Yeah.
They're not getting together and, congregating in some place to listen to someone. So I think it's a mix of things, but really like podcasting itself as a very strong on-demand audio medium has really shown itself to be useful in quite a few different ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we've already touched on this, but I'm interested in hearing why do you think everybody's drawn to this format? More and more people each day are launching their shows. More people are consuming podcasts than ever before. Is it the format? Is there something special in the actual format, or is it something totally different?
I think it's definitely a situation to where the medium is the message, and podcasting itself has allowed for humanity to kind of scratch at this itch that they maybe feel they're not getting satisfaction from with other traditional medium.
Yeah.
And that really goes to, if you talk to anybody, it talks about like how we don't have proper discourse these days. People yell at each other, watch cable news or something, especially here in the States.
Yeah.
And it's people yelling. We're very surface level and angry. And there was this desire to get into actually like thoughtful, long form content. There's also a little bit of a backlash to other traditional media in that everybody keeps saying that, attention spans are going down, right? I don't necessarily believe that's true, but that desire to have quality time interacting with an idea or a medium is really attractive, right? So in a little bit of that, the on-demand audio, there's no time limit, there's no commercial breaks that we have to work around. We're all making this up as we go, has allowed for people to really get a lot out of podcasting. Now, on the other side is like podcasting started in 2004, right? And it didn't blow up until probably, I guess, 7 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So we are so early in this, and it's just audio on demand, right? It's spoken word, but it can be so many different things. So like we've seen people do audio drama that's super highly produced. We've seen people do musicals. People do 3-hour long deep dives into history.
Yeah.
We've seen people talk to people, panels, all that. So there's so much variety here. And that means that maybe you don't like that intimate nature. Well, here's a podcast over here, which is just, the daily news in under 10 minutes. And that appeals to everybody. So there's definitely a situation to where the message is the medium. Podcasting allows for all of this stuff that we really innately need as humans. But then the other side is just like variety.
Yeah.
Like anybody can get into this. Anybody can do it really well. Anybody can play with the format. And that's very freeing. Without the gatekeepers of like a television network, there can be so much out there that's geared towards your specific taste. And I think that's what really appeals to people.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, like in terms of our company, Nootka Sound, like our biggest thing that I personally like to think of is it's not just audio, it's your message to the world. And it's basically that, as you said, like the medium itself is the message.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a question that I like to ask my guests occasionally because we've been getting some very interesting answers. What are the 3 most important skills a podcast host should have?
The first thing that pops out to my head is curiosity. I think a podcast host needs to be very curious about their guest and about the topic. And that's going to drive them forward. And number 2 that kind of goes into that is understanding that there's a third person there. I talked to Matt Whitman, who's on a podcast called No Dumb Questions with a guy named Destin Sandlin, YouTuber. And they always talk about the third chair.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're 2 very smart guys. Sometimes they have guests on. They're very smart too. And it's really easy to just kind of like continue the conversation. Right. What they do that I think everybody should learn from is they take the position that there's somebody sitting right next to them who maybe doesn't know about what they're talking about. So always thinking that there's an audience member next to you so that, hey, you and I may be talking about, some high level podcast thing, but not everybody who's listening does. So taking a step back and just being like, I know what this is, but can you explain it to me? Or just, for the third chair, just so you know, like the context of this situation. That's awesome. And I don't mean to take third chair because I know that's their name for their audience, but great concept. So that's curiosity, remembering that there's an audience member right next to you. 3 things. This is probably a cop out a little bit, but I think a host needs to be somebody who cares deeply about the content.
So true.
And so they need to be somebody who is really constantly thinking like, is this moving forward? How am I going to maybe edit this in post?
Yeah.
Am I asking all of this? Am I getting the full situation? Am I making the episode that I want to make? And so it does take a little bit of a split brain as you're in there and you're being curious and you're asking the questions, to also remember that you're constructing an actual show here. And so there are some things that you want to hit. And I'm sure preparation comes into that and all of that jazz. But I'd be interested to know just kind of like, how do you approach hosting a podcast?
Well, I don't basically. Like, my deal is like, this is obviously the only show that I host. And to be honest, at first I felt really uncomfortable like standing behind the mic. And I still feel that way to an extent, because even though I'm a musician and I used to do live shows and perform or even do sound engineering for live shows, I still get nervous whenever I need to record a podcast episode, because I don't feel like a podcast host. I just feel like a person who's passionate about podcasting, and I want to talk about it. And I want to hear other people's opinions, and then I would kind of, just share my own thoughts as well. So that's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah, I think you're doing a great job. One of the things that I think you've done really well is providing context in questions. As people ask questions, especially in an interview format, it's very tempting to kind of go in 2 different directions, right? One is to ask very short, quick questions that allow somebody to expand on it. This is kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar, but there's a guy over here named Larry King.
Yeah.
Who was like a long interviewer, and he kind of preached a simple interviewee like conversation, like ask the big questions, but ask them in a very simple way. And that can often lead to just rehashing the same stuff. On the other side of that is to end up making the whole podcast kind of about you, because you're adding so much context to questions that you're really just kind of almost asking for people to agree with you or not.
Yeah.
It's like, I see it as this and this and this. And then 10 minutes later, there's a question and it's like, well, what does that question actually mean? And then the middle, which I think you've done a really good job at, is just providing context for questions that would be how you would have a conversation with somebody in person, right? Like, hey, I'm thinking of this question. Let me give you a little bit of background, but I'd be interested in know what you think. And then kind of that back and forth is really good. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but you're doing good, dude.
Yeah, thank you for those compliments. I totally get that. I mean, like, and to help other people out, like, I always have questions prepared. I'm one of those guys that like to script everything. So especially because I'm not a native speaker, it kind of helps me have the questions prepared in advance. But also if I hear something that kind of tickles my imagination, I just ask about it.
Yeah. We did an article where we talked to a bunch of different podcasters about like, how do they get comfortable behind the mic too?
Yeah.
And one of the big things that people said was, I write stuff down even if I'm not going to read it. And I thought that was great because they are preparing, they understand like what needs to go into this. They're creating a question, or even if like they're doing a scripted series, they're creating a script and they prepare for it. Even if they don't actually read it verbatim off of a sheet or something, it's in their head is like, okay, almost like going through lines again. And I thought that was great because a lot of times people can come on and they can wing it, and there's a certain appeal to that. And it does allow you to follow rabbits down the hole and kind of follow your curiosity. But preparation, especially like written preparation, is so key. Like that can really make a podcast really sing.
Yeah. In my experience, like you have to be a good journalist to be a good podcast host. That's what I kind of, whenever I tell my clients, when we're producing a show, I always tell them, you need to do a lot of research beforehand. And if you don't have the time or the energy to do it, hire somebody. So either you do it or hire somebody to do it, but the research needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is kind of a follow-up to the previous question. When you listen to a show, what are the qualities that draw you in and make you want to subscribe? Is it the pristine audio quality? Is it the host? Is it the topic? What is it?
My taste has changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, this is probably still my default. I like pristine audio, and not just pristine, but I like old-fashioned Radio Lab where it's like sound effects out the wazoo. You have like super detailed on like what music is playing, what is the tone being conveyed, that like hyper edited documentary style. Like I'm a sucker for that. Like Radio Lab circa 2012 is like, that's my jam, right?
Yeah.
But my tastes have changed over the years. I kind of equate it to like drinking beer. Like if you like beer, eventually, you're going to get into like the craft brews, and eventually you're going to get into like just trying stuff because it's weird. And I've definitely seen that. There's a podcast called Richard's Famous Food Podcast, which is like a sound medley, crazy. It's basically if you took Radio Lab and turned it into like Pee-wee's Playhouse kind of style podcast. And he just breaks the form. He plays with the form, super sound edited, ton of sound design, and it's just fun. Right.
Yeah.
And so that I would consider as like the weird side of it. I do listen to a lot of long form conversations, news stuff. And I would say audio quality in that realm doesn't matter to me as much as base level audio quality.
Mm-hmm.
And to that, I would say to podcasters out there who are listening, like you're probably going to disagree with me because you're an audiophile, but like the distance from very bad to good enough is pretty short. Like you can go and get a pretty cheap microphone off of the internet and you'll sound good enough to keep me around to where I'm not annoyed.
Yeah.
Now the level from good enough to awesome and great is a lot larger, and you can spend a lot of money to get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the base level audio is kind of all that I ask for. If you have base level audio, that's going to really help you like keep people around, and you can do that for pretty cheap out there. Now, when it comes to actual content on those, I did a presentation at Podcast Movement that talked about like the podcast growth funnel.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you get people from like just hearing about your podcast to actually being like subscribers and then evangelists for your podcast?
Yeah.
And one of those steps is to get them to follow your podcast. How do you get them from the first time they press play to our research shows that if somebody plays 3 episodes, they're going to listen to like 90% of future episodes.
Yeah.
So how do you get them to stick around? And the biggest thing that I see that podcasters fail in this regard is they don't realize that every single episode they make could be somebody's first time listening.
Yeah.
And so they maybe start their podcast with this long inside joke or this inside story about who they are. They may start it with a ton of ads. They may start it with, a giant preamble that has nothing to do with the actual value proposition, which is if you have a podcast about a specific topic and somebody hits play, they want to hear about that topic. They want to get something out of it. If you don't immediately give them that value proposition, you're basically wasting their time and they're going to go elsewhere. It's kind of like if you went to an ice cream shop and you said, I'd like ice cream. And they said, all right, first let me tell you about milk. Like it just wouldn't fulfill that value proposition. So yeah, like if a podcast doesn't fulfill that within the first, 2 minutes of an episode, sometimes I just go, all right, this isn't worth it.
Yeah, I totally get that. And To me, what I've noticed, and that kind of puts me off, like whenever I get into a podcast, is that people tend to give up over time. Like the more episodes they do, the quality goes down. And it's like quantity over quality, which is kind of not ideal.
Absolutely. The big thing, so we call that like pod fade. You get like 10 episodes in and then things start to get worse and worse, or maybe you go from being a weekly show to like every 2 weeks to once a month to never again.
Yeah.
Talking to podcasters, one of the things I think that really helps that out is your motivation to do a podcast is probably never greater than when you decide to do a podcast, like that very beginning part. And so if you can map out, what is this thing going to look like in 6 months? Like brainstorm a whole bunch of topic ideas, come up with like, what is the format of every show, but also like, how am I going to make every show? Like, what is my process there? What are the 4 steps I need to take to ensure my show is going to be good? All of that upfront planning, when you have like, you're super, super, super motivated, is just going to pay dividends, because one day you're not going to be motivated. And so if you don't have a plan at that point, you're just going to fail. So really take that time up front to create that plan for you. And then as you go, make sure you plan in that, once every 2 months, I'm going to do the same thing and plan the next ones. And that's going to just help you if you can do it in batches like that.
Yeah. This goes back to what we were saying about consistency, but keep in mind that like also mental health is important, and it's really easy to get burned out. So kind of like it's okay to take a break now and again. And the thing that will help you eventually is to actually plan for those breaks. And actually, I'm going to do 5 episodes and then I'm going to take a break for a week or 2, and then I'll continue. And that's the way I see it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you do a good job with this with seasons, right? You kind of plan out, hey, I'm going to have a season. This is the end of the season. We're going to come back again. And I think that just kind of helps set the expectations on you, right?
Yeah. What would you recommend to somebody who's just starting out?
I kind of think it goes back to what we just said. Build your podcast on paper. Build your podcast on paper. What's it going to be? Who is your audience? What tone do you want to do? What is your value proposition? Like, are people coming to your podcast because they would need to learn something? Are they doing it to escape? Are they just doing it because they like you? What is that value proposition? Like, why are they hitting play? And that's beyond just, I want to listen. It needs to be, what do they get out of it? But coming up with that, coming up with ideas, all of that stuff, building your podcast on paper is huge. And then the other side of that is do it. The hardest, scariest thing to do is to actually hit record.
Yeah, that's true.
You can tie yourself in knots forever and ever and being like, I don't like the sound of my voice, or I don't have the right setup yet. Just do it. And I think set an expectation for yourself, maybe that like, hey, I'm going to do this and I'm going to delete it. Like, I think Ernest Hemingway said the first draft of anything is bad, to paraphrase. So like maybe give yourself that safe space and just be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to record this. I'm going to delete it, or I'm never going to publish it. But I just know that I need to get comfortable behind a mic. If maybe you're at home, you got your mic set up and you're just like, all right, I got 15 minutes. I'm just going to go to an article on the web. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to record myself reading that article. And then I'm going to try to paraphrase it off the top of my head and just get comfortable recording. Being behind a mic is huge. But I guess that would be like my 2 things: plan and then just jump into it at the same time.
Okay, going back to Podchaser, we have already talked about this a little bit, but what are your next steps? What does the future hold for Podchaser?
World domination. No, really we're focused on powering that top of the funnel when it comes to podcast growth. And we want to get podcasts in front of people, right? That discovery mechanism. So you're going to see that manifest in kind of a couple of different ways. One is in our discovery platform, which is podchaser.com. It's what people go to. They don't have to be logged in to see anything on there. It's a website, not an app, yada, yada, yada. What we're looking to do is really create that community. So there are 2 ways that people discover podcasts right now, even though like Podchaser discovery app, let's be completely honest. The first one is SEO, right? This is, they go and they Google I'm a baseball fan. They Google best baseball podcasts. They click one of the top 3 links and they go and listen to one of those podcasts.
Yeah.
That's how they discover it. Or they search, Shaquille O'Neal podcast appearances and they go and see every interview he's done, and that's what they do. So we kind of have that locked down in Podchaser right now. Like, you go make a list. It's the most powerful thing you can do in podcasting. You'll be at the top of Google in a couple of weeks. You add credits, it's going to just continue to increase that kind of organic net. So SEO, got that. The other side is word of mouth. It's what are your friends like? What are your influencers like? What do tastemakers like? And for that, what we're looking to do is double down on what we call community. So getting those interaction points to where I can go on and I can say, people I work with, Bradley and Cole, like, hey, is this a good episode? Or, hey, I'm looking for a recommendation for something to listen to on a road trip. Can you send me those? Or, hey, I saw that you rated this podcast 5 stars. What did you like about it? Or I noticed in your review, you mentioned this. So just kind of creating those connection points where people can talk, as well as for fan groups to come on and be like, hey, we're really big fans of my brother and me. Look at this cool meme I made. And just kind of creating that community there. So I think that's probably our biggest push, is just creating more of that interaction. And then on the other side of it too is creating more opportunities for discovery. So when you go and you listen to an episode, being able to say, hey, you liked this episode, here's other ones that you might like. I think that's all important stuff. For the business at large, again, just to be completely transparent, we're looking to create tools that allow brands and marketers to actually get into podcasting and leverage it. So that helps everybody. That helps podcasters monetize. It helps bring in more money into podcasting. It helps bring more attention to podcasting. And it just helps everybody, whether you have an audience of 100 people or 2,000 people or 2 million people. So we're going to be continuing to build tools like that. You're going to see us build out insights into, what is this podcast demographics, but also like, if you do well with this podcast, how else would you build a campaign in the ad space? So that's probably our 2 big initiatives, is that discovery side and that side. A lot of cool stuff in the future. We have over 12 million credits. Like, there's a ton that you can do with credits. You can do, transcripts that actually show who is talking. You can do a bunch of cool stuff there, like, similar creators, all of that. So
yeah, can't wait to see that. Good luck with all of that.
Thanks.
So if somebody wanted to check out Podchaser, where can they do so?
Yeah, if you are a podcaster, go to podchaser.com/claim. Again, 100% free. What that does is allows you to take control of your podcast page. We're a directory, so we pretty much have every single podcast already. But if you claim your podcast, you can go on there and do things like create a vanity URL, add your podcast to new discovery categories, add merch to your page, add links, and all of that is just going to, 1, it's going to help deliver your growth and monetization goals, but 2, because we're a website and not an app, it's all Googleable, and that just kind of increases your mesh out there. So if you're a podcaster, podchaser.com/claim, go there. While you're there, check out Podchaser if you're interested in podcasts, create lists, all of that stuff, follow people. It's fun. I use it every single day, and I would if I wasn't working here, just because it's how I find podcasts these days. Follow us on social media. We're at Podchaser everywhere. Twitter is probably where we're most active. I think that's where we actually found each other.
Yeah.
We post really stupid stuff. Feel free to post really stupid stuff at us. And that's pretty much it. If anybody wants to get in contact with me, my email is dave@podchaser.com. We pride ourselves on talking to podcasters out there. If you have questions or anything at all, just hit me up and we'll do our best to answer those.
Awesome. Well, Dave, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been really good to speak to you.
Thank you, dude. It's been a lot of fun. I really liked hearing your perspective on everything too.
Awesome. That's it. Thank you for listening. Make sure you share this podcast with your friends and click that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions for us or suggestions about a topic we can cover related to the podcasting industry, leave a comment below or send us an email at info@nootkasound.online. If you're a podcast producer, show host, or an audio editor and would like to be on the show, send us an email. We would love to have you here. Also, make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the handle @the Nootka Pod.